All right, everybody. Second to last topic for the entire semester, and I have a dog here who very much wants attention, so he actually also just wants to sleep. So we'll see how this works out. All right, we're up to policy. Let me scooch over a little bit. We're up to, so you can see the dog. Yes, hello. We're up to, thank you. We're up to policy, oh, he loves policy, don't you, buddy? So in order to think about policy, you have to think about what your goal is. And what it points out in the book, and I might update this if I were to ever do another edition of the book, is that the post-Keynesians are after high levels of output and employment, and it would be a good thing to have price stability along with that. I say I might update it. Are you getting down? I say I might update it because the whole climate change thing is a really big deal. And so that might be something I would include as well in a newer edition. But this is not a new edition, it's the old one. And then the question becomes, if those are our goals, then how are we going to go about achieving them given the current structure of the international monetary system? And the argument is that there's a lot of instability, and well, we just finished the financial. We just finished talking about the Asian financial crisis, right? My God, what if those prices has never been bid up to those levels to start with? I told you that the GDP fell by 40%, and people were plunged into poverty. People who had absolutely nothing. Yeah, okay. Why don't you get down? People who had absolutely nothing to do. Oh, you know what it is? I have a cup of tea because I was born in England. It's not instinctive, but I grew up with an English mother. In fact, I still have one. But he loves tea, so he can smell it. Buddy, I hate to encourage you to think that this is yours. Let me drink some and you can have the rest. All right. Well, hang on. All right, don't tell anyone that I did this, but I'm giving him the rest of the tea. And there he goes. Just don't spill it. Oh, it's not good enough for you? He took a couple of licks and he stopped. Right. So we want to make sure that the international monetary system is conducive to creating welfare-enhancing outcomes for the citizens of the world. I guess it might be one way of saying it. And here we go. The chapter lists, I think, 5 things that should be targets. I've got my notes here, and my notes say 5, but let me double check here. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but he sure is enjoying that tea. Yes, 5 things on the very first page. 5 problems. 5 things that frustrate the goals of achieving high levels of output and employment and price and financial market stability. I have no doubt created a monster now because he's going to think that's his all the time. Yep, he's finishing that off. Okay. Oops. All right. Then first, currency prices are misdetermined. Yeah, I got an idea. Are misdetermined. He is still going at it. Second, currency price volatility reduces expectation of profit. Okay. Currency price volatility leads to fall in expected profit, leads to fall in demand. I hate to start with one color and switch to another, but this blue one's not getting it done, and I don't want to go back and rewrite the others, so we shall simply switch to green. 3. Currency price misdetermination And volatility leads to lower world trade. Fourth, again, these are all problems that are being created by the way the system's organized right now. Currency markets contribute to developing countries' woes. Contribute to. Had enough there, buddy? Developing countries. Oh, yeah, it's completely empty. Can I fit this last word? Yeah. Woes. Pretty much. That's W-O-E-S, if it didn't quite fit. And fifth, the manner in which, now I need to go to the bathroom, which means I'll have to let him out. That's it. The international monetary operates, in which the international monetary system operates, tends to create contraction and unemployment. Tends to create contraction. Sorry, that says contraction. It's all in the book. And unemployment. Okay, what I want to do is I want to talk about each one of these five. And then after that, talk about possible policy. Or maybe I'll mix it in. We'll have to see. Who knows what I'll do? I didn't expect to give away the rest of my tea to my dog, but I did that. So, on the first one, the problem I was running into with, I don't know if you've heard the term misaligned exchange rates. And I really would have preferred that term because it kind of makes more sense in the context of this. But it's already taken, right? It's already used for something else. And misalignment generally means exchange rates at a level that don't generate balanced trade. So I had to make something up. And man, I struggled with this. I don't like misdetermined. It sounds awkward, but it's all I could think of, all right? And the idea here is that exchange rates should be driven by, let's see what John Harvey says here. National currencies should logically reflect the relative value of the goods and services produced in that country and the profitability of firms based there. All right. So what we would be hoping for is, oh good, the computer rebooted. What we would be hoping for is that the U.S. dollar somehow represents the profitability of U.S. firms and the popularity of the goods and services that are produced there. In other words, we're leaning heavily here towards the sort of the real outcomes as opposed to the financial outcomes. And instead, what we've got is they're so tightly tied to financial capital that forecasts of the forecasts that drive currency prices have an unreasonably short time horizon. You should see, and that's why I was excited that the computer rebooted. I had to. I haven't had the computer on campus since March, and right now it's August, and I discovered from user services that that's creating a problem and that the computer thinks I need a new version of Windows or a new license. Hang on. Which I don't. It just I haven't been on campus for the computer to be told we've renewed the license. Plus several other things. All right, so let me show you here what I'm talking about now that it's rebooted. And everything is up to date. So again, the problem is that we've got this really short time horizon over which people are creating forecasts to explain, hello dog, how where they think the currency price is going to go. And so we therefore see, because the currency prices are so tightly tied to financial markets, which have really short time horizons, we see these massive fluctuations in currency prices that if you stop for a second and thought to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would it move that much? Is Germany really that much more attractive than the U.S. over the course of 2 years, or vice versa? And we put up with fluctuations in currency prices that we wouldn't even begin to tolerate if it were inflation. And yet it is. It's just a different form of inflation. So let me show you some of the data I have put together here. show you the data I've got here. Let's see here. JohnTerrenceHarvey.com, International Monetary, Study Questions. Got a couple of articles that really point this out nicely. Oh, I think I actually incorporated them into a PowerPoint. Exam 3. No, I didn't. But I have it in these articles right here. And that's not it. Be down here. It might be there. I'll open that one. Hello, dog. Open that one. And we'll see what we got here. Does this have a chart of exchange rate movements? It sure does. This is exactly what I was after. Okay, check this out. I want to show you this. Go chase that. This is what I show in class when I'm trying to illustrate what a big deal this is. This is from a paper what John Harvey done writ. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is just how volatile the currency market is. These were currency price movements sort of after the financial crisis and up to when I wrote the paper. And you'll see here that from over the course of like just a little bit over 2 years, the dollar depreciated relative to the euro by 30%, right? So do you think that the United States of America was 30% less valuable than Europe over the course of 2 years? I mean, to me, that's the sort of thing that you would see over the course of a century. And to put this into a context that I think you'll have a better grasp of, what if inflation had gone up by 28% over what if prices had risen by 28% over those couple of years? Because they did. It's just that it was the price of European goods and services to Americans that went up by 28%. This is a massive amount of depreciation to then, of course, turn right back around again over the course of the next year and go 18% the other direction. And then over the course of the next 9 months, go 17% the other direction. And then over the course of the next 7 months, sorry, the dog ran into the camera, to go back, back and forth at rates that we would be marching on Washington if these were the inflation rates in the U.S. But in fact, they are inflation rates. And these should not be fluctuating anymore than the price of domestic goods and services. But it's because they're tied into the financial market, and financial markets overreact, and financial markets are especially vulnerable to the fact that we have this constant battle between the uncertainty and the animal spirits. And so the volatility that is characteristic of a financial market is superimposed on this extremely important price. Now, if you want to go and waste your money in the stock market by following these huge trends and so forth, go ahead. But everyone is not suspect, but what word am I after there? I used to have a guy in class years ago. Doug Cooney was his name. And he was like a personal thesaurus for John Harvey. Whenever I couldn't think of a word, oh, you mean so-and-so? I was like, that's right, Doug. Not a victim to. Everyone has to deal with these changes right here. It's not limited to the people that are causing the fluctuation. So these are massive shifts in currency prices here. And we've become jaded to them, though. I mean, we kind of think, well, that's just the way it is. But yet firms are going bankrupt over this. We had a job candidate back when Dr. Toshkov, when we hired him, one of the competitors for the job was a guy from Belgium. And I was talking to him about how he learned to speak English, and other than just being in school in Belgium. And he said that his father runs an importer-exporter business. And so he would travel a lot to the United States because his father would import things from the U.S. and then sell them in Europe. And he said that his father was almost wiped out when the euro opened by collapsing like it did, as I showed you on, I think, the last video. I can't remember which one it was now. But his father was almost wiped out because the American goods and services are becoming so expensive in euros then. Even though, whatever it is that he was buying in the U.S. was no more or less valuable to a person in Belgium than it was before, but the price of a dollar went up so much that his father was almost wiped out. Right, so here's somebody who's trying to do something that would hopefully be a service to Americans. What have you got, buddy? Stay. What is it? Okay, that's yours. All right, didn't know what he had. So that hopefully would be increasing commerce, bringing things to folks that they couldn't get otherwise, and because of this, let's go back and look at it again. Here it is. Because of this collapse of the euro from $1.80 per euro to 80 cents per euro. So in other words, back before all this collapse, his father was able to get $1.20 for each euro. Then he was only able to get 80 cents per each euro. Now think about how that's going to cut into your profits. I mean, that's an incredible amount of fluctuation. And there's no logical reason for it. And this is something that's widely recognized by neoclassical economists as well, that we see exchange rate fluctuations that are far wider than one could logically explain by just saying that those are fundamental factors. They then don't really go on to explain what is going on, but nevertheless, they do recognize it. Now, let me show you one other article with similar statistics. This one is on the period 2001-2008, which is precisely the one where we're talking about with the introduction of the euro. Here it is. This was the first time I did this. The first time I thought, hey, I have a little chart in the paper showing how much the appreciation and depreciation was to drive it home rather than just a graph. Look at those numbers. And this was the first time I did it, so I didn't have a little thing in there saying how many months it was, which I found very helpful otherwise. This is clearly 1 year, right? Or thereabouts. January 2005 to December 2005, the dollar appreciated by 14% against the euro. It depreciated by 35% against the euro. Once that euro, this was that euro recovery, that euro recovery that we talk about in class, or in the book. So, from 2002 to 2004, and not even the entire, because it didn't start till April, a 35% dollar depreciation, a 24%. We should be seeing numbers like 5%, 6%, 10% should be something like, wow, that's unbelievable. And yet, as you can see here, 10% would actually be rather mild compared to what we actually see. So, returning to the point at hand, and going back up here, let's see if I can do this without standing up. The first worry that post-Keynesians have after you make the statement that, what they want is higher levels of employment and higher levels of output growth. Yeah, but these currency prices are making that difficult. The fact that these currency prices are so tightly tied to the financial market and are therefore so volatile, think about trying to do business with another country when, for reasons that have nothing to do with the specific market you're working in, prices are rising and falling by 30%. Profit margins are maybe 5 or 10, so you're wiping out profits. And this is very discouraging to international trade, which, by the way, where's that one? Yeah, number 3. Number 3 is, this is discouraging to international trade. Now, there's a hell of a lot of international trade, right? So apparently it didn't put an end to it. But there are a number of studies, these are cited in the book, that say, if you look at the numbers, it is evident that the fluctuations in these exchange rates and the volatility therein is discouraging international transactions. That's one of the reasons why, this is why I told you my very first paper was on multinational subsidiaries. One of the reasons why you establish a multinational, and there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is that now you can control the exchange rate movements. Because let's say that your business in Japan is doing fairly well, but the yen's depreciating. So, well, crap, if I repatriate the money now, I'm not going to get many dollars out of it. And ultimately, my villa on this beautiful lake in New York, I have to pay the rent in dollars. So what I can do is, just leave the money there. Just leave the money there, maybe reinvest it in something in my company rather than bring it home. But when I have control of various stages of the supply chain, or when I have control of various people at the horizontal level, various firms across the globe, then I have more control over my when I repatriate money, and I have more control over my profits, which, by the way, is not on this list. It is mentioned in the chapter, but the idea that these currency price fluctuations also tend to reduce the level of competition in the world market. Let me move this light over here. I just noticed it's causing a bit of a glare. It lowers the level of competition. And why? Because those who are the closest to, the small businesses, the ones that are going to be, wiped out by a, 15 to 20% movement in the exchange rate, they're wiped out. And you've only got the big ones left. And we don't really want that as economists. We want competition. We don't want, a massive global merger of firms that then allows them to control the currencies better, but then also control us better. Because the whole point of capitalism is anti-business. It's not pro-business. It's supposed to be anti-business, pro-consumer. And I think people really forget that. So let's see. I've said a word or two about that one and that one. Let me go back and see if I skipped anything I wanted to say. Let's see. Misdetermined exchange rates lead to a misallocation of resources because they are not sending the appropriate signals to those involved in the activities that create output and employment. Like that guy that was the candidate for Dr. Toshkov's job. Dr. Toshkov was a unanimous choice, so that guy was never really in the running. Yeah, he was until we talked to Dr. Toshkov. Like his father, who is creating employment, creating output, creating things for people, and being nearly wiped out by these financial flows that are mispricing currencies and discouraging international trade. Maybe I should have said that. Currencies are mispriced. No, that's still not it. Anyway, okay. And then on this one down here that I've already crossed out, I explained that one completely. All right. I also, in this one I'm less sure of, because, hey, I made this crap up, right? This one I'm less sure of, but it seemed to me that there would be a domestic impact of this as well, that when you have these fluctuating exchange rates, that just makes it, not for the United States. For the United States, trade is a relatively small percentage. It's a lot of money, but it's a small percentage of total GDP. But when we're talking about Belgium, where international trade is a huge percentage of GDP, then not only are the fluctuating exchange rates a negative if you're in the importing and exporting business, but if you're just in the domestic sector at all, when you know that the revenues and the incomes of those people who are liable to be your customers are easily interrupted, then this may discourage you from undertaking business to start with in Belgium, even if it has nothing to do with trade. Let's see. Okay, let's do this one next. Currency prices contribute to developing country woes. And, okay, let me back up and explain a couple of things here that are going to lead into some of the descriptions of what should we do to fix everything. I've already explained to you what happened in Mexico and in Thailand, and what a disaster this was. But let me back up a bit and tell you why they liberalized their financial markets to start with, all right? Because I think that's an important part of the story here. And Eileen Grable has written tons of really good stuff on this, so you'll see her cited in numerous places throughout the book, but she does some really good stuff on developing countries and financing development. And a lot of times developing countries need developed countries' money because they need to be able to buy things in developed countries that they can use for economic development, whether it be technology or machinery or whatever. But it's certainly a lot more convenient to be able to have dollars to trade for these high-tech things from the U.S. than to have pesos. All right, so they want to be able to attract this money, and what they had been doing since World War II, Coble. It was since World War II. He said it wasn't. Since World War II, was to borrow money from the World Bank, IMF, from commercial banks, and so on. They would borrow money, and in whatever currency they needed to use to buy this stuff for economic development. And then, but then there would be all kinds of conditions on them. They would say, the banks would say, okay, you can borrow this money, but then you got to do A, B, C, and D. All right, and if you don't do these 4 things, then we're not going to loan you the money, and we're going to come in and check on you now and then. Which, quite honestly, is what a bank would do if you were borrowing from them to build a restaurant. All right, so it's not something they're just doing to a developing country. If you were borrowing to build a restaurant, you bring in a business plan, and they've got a say in this now, and they're going to say, well, we're not crazy about this part of the idea, but we really like this part. Double this up. And they're going to come in and check on you. They're not going to wait until you get your first payment in to make sure you are doing what you said you were going to do. So, but this was not appreciated many times. And furthermore, the deeper problem was that a lot of times these conditions were conditions that were actually not conducive to economic development, which is a problem of the underlying theory. The theory that was guiding the advice was not sound. All right, so that's a whole nother course that I'm not going to do here. I did have a summer course I used to teach where we would cover that, but I'm not teaching it this year. So the idea emerged among developing nations that, well, hell, I'm tired of being told what to do with the money we attract. Just think if we attracted the money via our stock market or our financial industries, then this money would also, these dollars would also end up in our system, so we could loan them out to whomever. We could trade currencies and have these dollars there already. We could attract dollars either by borrowing the money, or we could say, hey, anyone who wants to invest in our stock market can. And that was the financial market liberalization stuff we're talking about with the Asian financial crisis and the Mexican financial crisis. And they said, and the great thing about this money is there's no conditions on it, that there's nobody telling us what to do. Yes, there is. Because these people will pull their money out overnight if they don't think you're doing things that are going to help their profits. And so there very much are conditions. They're just not written down. And these conditions are, now if these conditions were very conducive to economic development, who cares? But what investors want are high profits. What investors like are things like high interest rates. Remember we talked about that way back, exam 2 material, where in order to attract funding, you're having to offer higher interest rates so that the Americans and the Japanese and the Germans and whatever are willing to, invest in your country. Sorry, I'm watching the dog right now, trying to figure out what he's about to do. And there's even been studies, apparently death squads increase the rate of profit, and so they're good for investment, because death squads from the government going around assassinating labor leaders who might actually ask for higher wages, which would be better for development, but aren't as good for profits. And so there's many things. So bottom line there is that no, it's not free from conditions. It's just a different set of conditions. And that developing economies should be very sensitive to the fact that that money is only there because they think you can make some money for them. And as soon as that's not true, that money will leave overnight. You saw the data on Mexico and on Thailand, and how in each case, once things started to look negative, everybody ran for the door. So this is actually a very unstable source of funding. The fact that you're getting it from international investors rather than from a bank or the World Bank or something like that. Sorry, he's been asleep all afternoon. I went downstairs to check on him, and he had like his nose tucked up under a pillow on the couch. And now I'm afraid he's well rested here as I try to finish out the last videos for this course. All right, so this means then, and what it says in the book is on this one, All the problems described as being created by the current design of the international monetary system apply just as much to developing states as developed. More so even, since developing states' economies are much more fragile. In addition, the possibility of crisis depresses economic activity, as we've already talked about. We're going to talk about some specific policy recommendations with respect to how developing economies can avoid that. Really interesting stuff from Eileen Grable after I get done with number 5. The last one, this is interesting. And the very first time I heard this, I thought, nah, that's ridiculous. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, that makes sense. Way back during the Bretton Woods system, when they were trying to set it up, John Maynard Keynes was the British representative at the Bretton Woods conference. And one of the things he was really keen on was that we control capital flows. I believe I mentioned something about that earlier, but let me draw it on the, here, let me throw this first. Let go, dog, let go. All right, go get that. Let me draw that on here. Remember back on exam 1 material. Yes, hello. Quantity of pounds, dollars per pound, demand for dollars U.S. exports, demand for pounds U.S. imports. Okay. And the bottom line here that I want to point out, just at the top there, but I believe you can see everything. The thing I want to point out here is the fact that the smaller the capital flows are, the corresponding capital flows, let's say that's as big as they are. There's demand for dollars ex-US plus KI-US, and here is demand for pounds MUS plus KO-US. That even were one of these curves to suddenly, shift inward, that we're never going to be very far away from the balanced trade exchange rate. Essentially, the exchange rate is going to, I missed it a little bit, fluctuate within a very narrow range around balanced trade. And I got to tell you, chronic trade imbalances cause political and economic problems. You're going to hear in some classes, well, it doesn't matter. Because they're going to go away on their own, because these are the free choices of people. They cause political problems, as we see in our own country with frequency, as we saw in Greece, because I'm going to tell you that Greece is really about trade and not about finance. And so Keynes was all in favor of, let us limit the flow of financial capital across national borders. Instead, today we've got, it'd be off to make these 10 times further away than this, we'd be off the board over there. So we have these massive capital flows that now dominate the market rather than international trade dominating the market, which is what we would prefer. And is, in fact, what neoclassical theory says is true. It's not, but I'm not against the idea that it's a good idea. So that's what he wanted. The American representative, Harry Dexter White, who also went by 3 names, he was not as crazy about the idea, and the Americans won. I mean, the Americans at that point of economic history were the ones in charge, so they got to win. So at first they limited flows, the blue lines, but then as time went on, they sort of phased out capital controls across borders. They also hoped that the fact that capital controls were different in one country than they were, or the rules in the financial capital, in the financial capital market were different from country to country, might slow down the flow as well. It didn't, all right? And by the 1980s, then these are massive. So, let's see, why did I mention that? So, Keynes was arguing that we need to have an international monetary system that operates in a way that tends to create balanced trade, all right? And the one we've got doesn't. You can stay at imbalanced trade forever because of the way we drew the graphs in the first part of the course. You could see that. And in particular, okay, here's another thing. And I've always wondered about the need for this, but anyway. Keynes and Harry Dexter White were in favor of a fixed exchange rate regime. Right? Now, you'll have to shift those sometimes. As, hey, let me show you the post-World War II story that I was telling you about earlier verbally, but didn't show you graphically, and then that'll fit right into this. Okay. All right, right after World War II. Demand for pounds, imports U.S. Okay, and let's say that the fixed exchange rate is a point rather than a range because it'll make it easier to talk about. So let's say that's where we fix it right after the war. And then, you know, tending towards balanced trade, although probably the U.S. had a surplus at that point. I don't know exactly where we were at that point because everyone else's economy is destroyed and ours isn't. All right. So, as the other economies recover, think about this. Two things happen. And I'm not going to draw the capital flows at all on there right now because that's not what I'm going to be getting at here. But as the other economies recover, so their demand for dollars falls. We'll call this 1965. I don't know. 1965. And our demand for their currencies, because now they've got something worth buying. They didn't have anything worth buying right after the war. So our demand for their currencies goes up. As opposed to, say, 1945 when the two green ones. 1945. So the rate that they set as the par rate right after the war was no longer an appropriate rate once the European and Asian economies recovered, such that by, and here, think about this. These are gone now. I don't want to completely erase them, but I want you to. Okay, we're still holding in 1965 the exchange rate down here. What does that create? U.S. exports, U.S. imports, trade deficit. Without moving the fixed rate, the rate we set after the war was inevitably going to be a rate. If that one was going to try to generate balanced trade or thereabouts, the one right after the war, eventually that rate was not going to do that. It was going to generate a U.S. trade deficit, and that's what kept happening. All right, now, even without the problem, now where do the capital flows come in causing a problem? Well, every time this turned up, then the financial capital market would attack the dollar, saying, well, there's no way the U.S. can keep the dollar there. They're going to have to ask for a devaluation. And, you know, you can think, if you think about this in this international organization, this is something you would have to sort of say, hey, we get a big trade deficit. Can we devalue? Is everyone okay with that? Can we make the value of the dollar lower? Which, by the way, okay, what happens then? Remember, going up devalues the dollar. I'm looking for another color here that I haven't used, purple. If we devalue the dollar, we can certainly get a lot closer to balanced trade, perhaps all the way there. Ooh, I see that the top part of the screen is just out of shot. You don't really desperately need it, but man, I can't quite reach the camera. Look out, doggy. There. If we devalue the dollar, we can get back closer to balanced trade, perhaps even all the way there. And oh yeah, capital flow, financial capital flows. Whenever there was a problem like this, then think about it. If you're an international, speculator, and you're thinking, whoa, that big U.S. trade deficit, there's no way they can hold it there. They're going to have to devalue. So let's sell. And so this is one of the things Keynes was worried about. If that's only a few people, that's no big deal. But if it's a massive part of the market, then we are pounding on the dollar. That the other intersection that includes the financial capital flows is way the heck up here now, all right? And as a consequence, then the U.S. has to devalue even if they could have survived that period anyway. So the capital flows made it very difficult for governments to do what they thought made the most sense. And the financial capital flows were not out to create the best outcome for the individuals. They were out to make as much money for themselves as they could. So Keynes was very worried when they put the whole thing together that there'd be an easy way to, when this sort of thing happens, an easy way to devalue the currency of the country that had the trade deficit. All right? I say an easy way. Guess what the trade surplus countries were saying? Well, y'all Americans are just lazy. That's a real dang shame about your trade deficit. But you know, hey, if you got to work, then perhaps you can get rid of that, huh? Whereas the Americans are like, come on, people. Remember when we helped you with the Berlin crisis and the Marshall Plan, and and there's those commies right across the border from you that we're protecting you from. Come on, give us a break. Let us devalue the dollar. And it can be politically embarrassing to devalue the currency. That's why with the peso, why they were trying to say they weren't going to do it, and then he broke down and did. It can be politically embarrassing because it feels like a recognition of weakness, and the other countries don't want you to do it. The ones that have the surplus don't want you to do it. Now, I need to point something else out here. As you know, the post-Keynesian view, ooh, that's a good idea, John. I just had an idea with respect to showing you macro summary. Here we go. I don't know why he does that. And I hope no one at home was horrified. I apologize, Melanie's not here. She, where's my bucket again? Oh, there it is. I found it. Okay. They, at her school, are only doing meetings right now, which means watching them on your computer on Zoom. But grade school teaching is dominated by women and therefore not respected. And so they don't believe that the teachers can be trusted to participate in the meetings unless they make them go to work and interact with other people who might be infected. So anyway, she's at school. All right. So I want you to remember this in this conversation about organizing international monetary systems and Keynes's concern that it be easy to devalue if you need to. Those countries that are, the post-Keynesian macro view is of an unstable system that finds it difficult to get to full employment. That's not the neoclassical view. It is of a stable system that tends towards full employment. So the reason why this is such a big deal to post-Keynesians is because they're already saying, hey, look, man, we're having a tough enough time as it is getting up here to full employment. And if imports are an extra hole punched in it, and exports are an extra spigot going in. Exports are an injection, imports are a leakage. So if I have a persistent trade deficit, then it is making it even more difficult for me to get to full employment. And there are countries that specifically target trade surpluses in order to generate more demand, in order to specifically to raise the water level up. Well, if you're going to specifically target a trade surplus, then you're specifically causing unemployment in another country's economy. You're getting the leak there. You're making it more difficult for another country to reach full employment, Greece and Germany. We'll get there in just a minute. So Keynes says we've got to have a way to, now okay, ready? We've got to have a way to make it easy for when a country is running a persistent trade deficit to have them be able to devalue their currency. Because if not, then the U.S. is first of all losing effective demand to these other countries, and they're liable to quit the system, which is exactly what they did. All right. So, do you want this fixed exchange rate system that limits the volatility and hopefully encourages business, or not? All right. So here's the crazy thing. All right. So under Bretton Woods, the U.S. is responsible for saying, "Hey, y'all, could we maybe devalue? Because I mean, things aren't good right now. And then the surplus countries are like, no, because we got a surplus. It's working out great for us. What if we put the burden on the surplus country? That's what Keynes recommended. He said, look, the surplus country is being an antisocial drain on the level of economic activity. Now, if it's a temporary thing, or if there's a whole literature on this, so I'm going to summarize it. Or if it can be shown that the country that has the trade deficit is just screwing around, and whatever exactly that means. But it's all laid out in several articles by Paul Davidson, where he has the sort of rules for such a system laid out. But what's important to us is, if someone is generating a persistent trade surplus, what you do is you punish them for the surplus. You in the Eurozone, for example, if Germany is persistently having a trade surplus, then you eventually tell them, hey, either you spend that money in another country, hopefully in a developing one. In fact, if we were doing a world system, we'd like to have that spending diverted to those who need it the most, or you lose it. You have to deposit it with our central bank in the system, and you lose it. Well, the first time I heard that, I thought, are you insane? I mean, why would we punish Germany? They're winning. And I could see the economic logic of it, but I couldn't. There's something morality-wise that seemed wrong about it, which shouldn't enter into it, but it does. But I got to thinking, wait a minute. That's exactly what we do in the NFL. Whoever wins the Super Bowl gets the worst draft pick the next year and gets a slightly more difficult schedule. Actually, there's not that much flexibility in scheduling in the NFL anymore, but a marginally more difficult schedule. They're also going to face problems with free agency because other teams tend to overvalue players who have been on a Super Bowl team, but that's not part of the system. That just emerged as a side effect. But we give the Super Bowl winner the last draft pick. Why not give him the first one? Why not a reward for doing so well? Why don't we do that? And I want you to think about that for a minute. Why don't we do that? Why do we punish the winners? And we're out to punish the winners. We, in basketball and baseball too, do the same thing. We punish the winners. And why? Because our goal is the National Football League. Our goal isn't, who won the Super Bowl last year? Oh yeah, Kansas City. Our goal isn't Kansas City. Our goal is the National Football League. And think about what happens if we reward the winners. Think about what happens if now Kansas City gets the first draft pick. Well, then they're going to get better and better. And the teams down the bottom, who really sucked last year? I don't know. I can't remember. I didn't have a fantasy league, so I didn't pay as much attention. But Tampa Bay for years really sucked, all right? So, or Detroit. And Detroit had a really bad team, but they had Barry Sanders, who was that close to being a god. A fantastic running back. So think about this. If we don't punish the winners in the NFL, then the winners get better and better. The losers get worse and worse. Nobody goes to the losers' games. And so the league collapses, all right? We start having fewer and fewer teams are declaring bankruptcy and are leaving the NFL. And we have to have other tems. That's what makes this exciting, is to have, gladiatorial contests between Dallas and Philadelphia, and this sort of thing. But if we've got 6 teams, then we're not going to make nearly as much money. So what do? We want the league to survive. We want the league to survive. We want the Eurozone to survive. We want the Bretton Woods system to survive because we believe that there is a plus that comes from that. In the NFL, the plus is all the revenue. In the Eurozone and in the Bretton Woods system, it was the fact that it made international business much easier to do with a fixed exchange rate. And they have more than a fixed exchange rate with the euro. They just have the same currency. So we want to preserve the system. So let's say that Detroit really sucks and they get the first draft pick. I'm a resident of Detroit. I know my team's going to lose, but I wouldn't mind seeing Barry Sanders play. So I'm going to go out and watch Barry Sanders play. I'm going to go to the game and pay for my ticket and buy my jersey and everything because Barry Sanders plays for my favorite team. And of course, if you're really bad for a long time, you can hopefully get good. All right. So that way, the reason they worry about competitiveness in the NFL is not from some moral standpoint. Rather, they want the system to survive. And so Keynes says, you want the system to survive? You need to punish the people that are winning. You need to punish the people that are draining the income from everybody else, because eventually that feels like a lot of fun at first, but eventually it causes the system to collapse, which is precisely what it did in the Bretton Woods system, and it's trying to in the Eurozone. Because in the Eurozone too, the trade deficit countries are negotiating from a position of weakness. And so what you want is for the trade surplus countries to be the ones to feel the pressure to deal. But they don't feel any pressure to deal. They can drag their feet. That doesn't really matter because, hey, I've got the trade surplus. And so I'm generating extra income for my country. And again, there are countries that specifically target. We don't really care that much about it. People accept dollars in exchange. People accept little pieces of paper in exchange for cool stuff like my cellular phone because ours is the world reserve currency. But countries like Germany and Japan and China, they want a trade surplus in order to generate sufficient demand to end up with something approaching full employment in their countries. And you know, the Chinese economy domestically is not that strong. They've got to sell stuff to other people. So, Keynes, that last item there that I just erased, I wish I hadn't done that now. Oh, I don't have it on here because I was approaching it a different way there. But Keynes is like, the way the system is currently organized, the burden of adjustment is always on the deficit country, and so there's no incentive on the part of the surplus country to do anything about it. And we should. Now, I've kind of introduced just now with that discussion a policy recommendation with respect to how do we manage an international monetary system, and particularly if we're going to go with a fixed exchange rate system and or something like the Eurozone, we have to find a way to make sure that the surplus countries don't drain the income away. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should have gone on to this part too. All right, so, well, we will in a minute. But what was Greece's choice when they had these trade deficits to Germany year after year after year, and they're building up debt to Germany? What's the only way to fix that is to throw your own economy into recession, because then that way you don't import as much. Remember, I've told you time after time that trade is very income sensitive but not very price sensitive, and so if we throw the Greek economy into recession, that helps, which is a bad thing, because then when the Greek economy goes into recession, the Germans are depending on selling stuff to the Greeks, so they come down. So Keynes felt like the way the system is set up right now, the way that the deficit countries are bearing the burden, that we end up pulling down the level of economic activity. Because the only way to stop bleeding out to the Germans is to throw your economy into a deep recession to where you can't afford to buy stuff from Germany anymore. And so as a consequence, Greek GDP, as it did, collapses. But then if the Germans are depending on exporting to Greece, then they come down too. So we're pulling the system down, rather than, if the imbalance had been, now the Germans are forced to spend money on Greek stuff, or however we want to do it, now we all go up. We don't all go down, right? So punishing the winner, if you will, is the way to maintain the system. Rewarding the winner is the way for the winner to have a lot of fun in at least the short run before the system collapses. Now, let's see here. Yeah, so that's an international monetary system, how you do that. And I'm going to talk about Greece on the next video. Now, what about just in general the problems with misdetermination and volatility and bandwagon effects and stuff like that? Not an international monetary system like the Eurozone or the Bretton Woods system, but just the currency market in general. How do we eliminate the misdetermination, the volatility, the bandwagons? Everything begins with capital controls. We can't have these massive financial capital flows and actually end up with currency prices that reflect the true underlying strengths of the nation's output and that will actually generate positive outcomes for the people who live there, as you can see from the financial crises. These hot capital flows are very damaging, and they really serve no useful economic purpose. We could have 1/10 the amount of capital flow we have right now, and then those capital flows would serve a useful purpose, all right? But as it stands, do you remember back when I told you that Keynes said something about if we force people to hold on to stocks forever, can you imagine how much time they would spend doing research on it? And then those stocks would really reflect the underlying strengths and weaknesses. So something similar with exchange rates. We have to start with capital flows. So as far as reducing as far as making a stable international system like the Eurozone, you punish the winners. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in the next video. As far as reducing the misdetermination and the volatility, we've got to reduce the capital flows. We have to say that if you buy U.S. financial assets and you're a German, you've got to keep it there for a year, or whatever the rule is going to be. Something to lower the volume of capital flow and make sure that those who are committing to it aren't committing to it with an eye towards leaving next week and creating this great volatility. And the last thing I want to say as far as policy goes before I get to the Greek situation, are a couple of things that Eileen Grable suggested in terms of trying to stop panics, trying to stop crises. She said we should set up tripwires, indicators that suggest to us, something bad's about to happen. A tripwire is, like in the Army, when they have a base, they put tripwires around it so that if somebody tries to sneak up there, they will trip the wire and it will cause, some tin cans to shake around if it's an old World War II movie or whatever. So we need to have some advanced indicators of financial crisis. Remember all those things I told you about what happened in Mexico and... have I got those data right here? I think I do. Yeah, here we go. What if we're keeping track of the ratio of domestic debt to GDP, which rose 400% in Mexico? What if we're keeping track of the percentage of external debt a country has? All these things shot up before the crises. So there are a number of financial indices that we could target to say, hey, and we do it in the domestic stock market. We'll shut the market down if there's an X% decrease in the average price. We just shut it down. That was emerged after the 1987 crash, which was the first semester I was teaching at TCU. And so much of the trading was computer guided that once one price started falling, they all started falling. They said, nope, we're not going to do that again. Now we have tripwires set in. We can do that for developing nations. We can set up tripwires. And then you can set up speed bumps. Speed bumps slow you down. All right. So a speed bump would be, we're shutting the market down for the rest of the day. The tripwire was the rate at which the prices just fell over a given time period, which is what we do in the U.S. stock market. Then the speed bump is, we're shutting the market down for the rest of the day. Let y'all sit and think about what you just did. No supper for you tonight. And then come back tomorrow with a clearer head, and hopefully that will slow down the massive decline in the prices. So we can build this in to developing nations, and some of it can be unilateral. She talks about the case in Chile, and Chile was not very affected by the Mexican financial crisis like other Latin American countries were, but they had rules. Let me look it up here again. There was a requirement to keep funds in Chile for a prescribed period. You had to maintain a compensating mandatory deposit with the central bank, non-interest paying, and there was a penalty for early withdrawal if you tried to leave. And so the rules were much more. If you're going to go establish a factory in Chile, okay, you're not going to leave overnight. We're not really too worried about that. If you're buying some of our financial assets, you could leave overnight. And so, no. We have rules to make it more difficult to invest in Chile, essentially. So that's going to be a downside, of course. But on the other hand, what it does is it says, but if we know now if you're putting your money here, though, you're not thinking about leaving next week. And that can be devastating, as we saw in the Asian and Mexican financial crises. All right, so let's see where that leaves us here in the chapter on policy. There's a long discussion of each one of these in the book, which I'm assuming you'll read. On page 130 where it starts with policy, look at that. Capital controls. That's the very first thing it talks about. And then there's a quote from Eileen Grable over here talking about the tripwires and the speed bumps. There's another quote from Eileen Grable. And then look, remember I was talking about placing the burden of adjustment placed on surplus countries? There that is on the top of page 133. And then look where we are in the book. So, I've got one more video to do, and then I have videoed every single lecture for both of my classes for the entire fall semester of 2020. Then I have a lot of other stuff to do, but it doesn't involve sitting here. So, let me stop this. I'll actually feel like I can get somewhere after that.